World War II was the most destructive conflict in modern history, ravaging Europe and leaving millions dead. By 1944, it was clear that the war was nearing an end, and for the Nazi regime, the once glorious Third Reich was collapsing. As Allied forces marched toward Berlin, the Nazi leadership faced a bleak reality. Defeat was inevitable. But while most people saw the war's end as the fall of the Nazis, for Heinrich Himmler, the feared head of the SS, it was simply the beginning of a new plan. In the shadows, Himmler and his inner circle were plotting something audacious, something shocking: the creation of a Fourth Reich, a post-war Nazi revival. This was not just about survival, but about preserving wealth, power, and ideology to be used at a later time. In August 1944, as the Battle of Normandy raged and Germany was losing its grip on Europe, Himmler summoned key players from German industry and the Nazi elite to Strasbourg, France. The purpose of this clandestine meeting was far from ordinary. It was at this meeting that Himmler's vision for a secret post-war Nazi empire took form, and the seeds of a conspiracy were sown, one that would see Nazi assets, wealth, and influence preserved for future generations. But the question remains, how far did this conspiracy go? And is it possible that, even today, the legacy of the Third Reich still casts its shadow over global affairs? The date was August 10th, 1944, and the venue was the luxurious Hôtel Maison Rouge in Strasbourg. The atmosphere was tense. As the war approached its bloody climax, Heinrich Himmler, one of Hitler's most trusted confidants, was already planning for a future beyond defeat. It was clear to Himmler that the Third Reich could not withstand the full force of the Allied assault, but he was not willing to let go of the Nazi dream. In attendance at the Strasbourg meeting were high-ranking SS officers, industrialists, and representatives of some of Germany's most powerful corporations. Among those present were key figures from companies like Krupp, Siemens, IG Farben, Thyssen, and Rheinmetall. These were not just ordinary businesses. They were the industrial backbone of Nazi Germany, crucial to the war effort and, as Himmler knew, vital to any post-war reconstruction. These companies had profited massively from their cooperation with the Nazi regime, benefiting from slave labor, war contracts, and the plundering of resources across occupied Europe. The purpose of the Strasbourg meeting was clear: to ensure that these industrial giants would survive the war and that their wealth would be preserved, hidden from the Allies. Himmler understood that Germany's military defeat was imminent, but he was already thinking ahead. His plan was to create a network of industrialists, SS officers, and loyal Nazis who could operate in the shadows after the war, building the foundations for a future Nazi resurgence, the Fourth Reich. The involvement of Germany's leading industrialists was not coincidental. These men, including Alfred Krupp, Fritz Thyssen, and Hermann Schmitz, the head of IG Farben, had made vast fortunes from their close ties to the Nazi regime. Krupp, for example, was the largest arms manufacturer in Nazi Germany, producing everything from tanks to U-boats. IG Farben was notorious for its role in producing the Zyklon B gas, used in the Holocaust. These men had as much to lose as the Nazi leadership if Germany fell, and they had every incentive to protect their wealth. At the Strasbourg meeting, the industrialists agreed to transfer large amounts of money, gold, patents, and other valuable assets to neutral countries such as Switzerland, Argentina, and Spain. These assets would be hidden in secret bank accounts, trusts, and shell companies out of reach of the Allies. By doing this, the industrialists ensured that their wealth would be safe even if Germany was defeated. This was the financial backbone of Himmler's plan, a global network of hidden Nazi wealth that could be used to fund a future Nazi revival. One of the key players in this conspiracy was Franz Hayler, the state secretary in the Reich Ministry of Economics. Hayler played a crucial role in orchestrating the transfer of assets to neutral countries. Using his connections with Swiss banks, Hayler helped arrange for vast sums of Nazi money to be hidden in secret accounts, ensuring that the wealth of the Reich would survive the war. But Himmler's plan wasn't just about preserving wealth. He knew that for the Fourth Reich to succeed, he needed more than money. He needed a network of loyal Nazis who could operate in the shadows, working to rebuild the Reich from the underground. This network would be made up of former SS officers, many of whom were already experts in clandestine operations, espionage, and sabotage. These were men who had been trained to operate behind enemy lines, and they were the perfect candidates for the kind of underground network Himmler envisioned. One of the most critical figures in this underground movement was Otto Skorzeny, a legendary SS officer and Hitler's favorite commando. Scorsese had already proven his loyalty to the Nazi cause through his daring rescue of the deposed Italian dictator Mussolini in 1943. After the war, Scorsese would go on to become a key figure in the so-called Nazi rat lines, the secret escape routes used by Nazi officials to flee Europe and avoid prosecution for war crimes. Scorsese was instrumental in helping former SS officers escape to South America, where they would regroup and continue their work in secret. In countries like Argentina and Brazil, these former Nazis found a haven, protected by sympathetic governments and wealthy supporters. Argentina, under the leadership of Juan Perón, was particularly welcoming to former Nazis, offering them protection and even new identities. The escape of high-ranking Nazi officials after the war is one of the most controversial aspects of the Fourth Reich conspiracy. Known as the rat lines, these secret escape routes allowed thousands of Nazis to flee to countries like Argentina, Brazil, and Chile, where they could live in relative safety, far from the reach of Allied justice. One of the most notorious figures to escape via the rat lines was Adolf Eichmann, the architect of the Holocaust. Eichmann fled to Argentina, where he lived under a false identity until he was captured by Israeli Mossad agents in 1960. Another key figure was Klaus Barbie, the Butcher of Lyon, who was responsible for the torture and murder of thousands of French resistance fighters. Barbie escaped to Bolivia, where he became a key player in the country's military dictatorship. The rat lines were not just a collection of ad hoc escape routes, they were part of a well-organized network, funded by Nazi assets and supported by sympathetic governments. One of the key figures in the rat lines was Bishop Alois Hudal, a Catholic bishop who used his position in the Vatican to help Nazis escape Europe. Hudal was an ardent supporter of the Nazi cause, and he used his influence to provide safe passage for hundreds of war criminals. But perhaps the most shocking aspect of the rat lines is the role played by the CIA and MI6. In the early years of the Cold War, the United States and Britain were more concerned with the threat of communism than with bringing Nazis to justice. As a result, many former Nazis were recruited by Western intelligence agencies to spy on the Soviet Union. Reinhard Gehlen, the former head of Nazi military intelligence on the Eastern Front, became a key figure in the CIA's efforts to gather intelligence on the Soviet Union. Gehlen's network, which was made up of former SS officers, was instrumental in providing the CIA with crucial intelligence during the early years of the Cold War. While the Fourth Reich never materialized in the way Himmler envisioned, the conspiracy to preserve Nazi assets and ideology has had lasting consequences. Many of the companies that collaborated with the Nazi regime, such as Siemens, Krupp, and IG Farben, continued to operate after the war, benefiting from the wealth and resources they had accumulated during the conflict. Some of these companies were brought to trial during the Nuremberg trials, but many escaped significant punishment, allowing them to thrive in the post-war world. The wealth that was hidden in neutral countries during the war also played a crucial role in the economic recovery of West Germany. The so-called German economic miracle of the 1950s was fueled in part by the wealth that had been preserved through the efforts of men like Himmler and the industrialists who attended the Strasbourg meeting. While the Allies were focused on rebuilding Europe and countering the Soviet threat, former Nazis and their collaborators were quietly working behind the scenes to ensure their financial and ideological survival. But perhaps the most disturbing legacy of Himmler's Fourth Reich conspiracy is the persistence of Nazi ideology in the modern world. Far-right movements across Europe and the Americas have drawn inspiration from the Nazi cause, using the same symbols, language, and rhetoric that fueled the Third Reich. In countries like Germany, the United States, and Brazil, neo-Nazi groups have continued to promote the ideals of racial purity, anti-Semitism, and authoritarianism, often with the support of wealthy individuals and organizations that trace their roots back to the Nazi era. The Nazi International, as it is sometimes called, is a loosely connected network of far-right groups, individuals, and organizations that share a common goal: the preservation of Nazi ideology and the creation of a new world order based on the principles of the Third Reich. This network includes everything from neo-Nazi skinhead groups to wealthy industrialists, former SS officers, and even politicians. It is a shadowy and secretive movement, but one that continues to exert influence in the modern world. The story of Himmler's Fourth Reich conspiracy is one of the most controversial and disturbing episodes of the 20th century. While the Nazis were defeated on the battlefield, their wealth, influence, and ideology were preserved through a secret network of industrialists, SS officers, and sympathetic governments. This network, which stretched from Europe to South America, allowed former Nazis to escape justice, rebuild their fortunes, and continue their work in the shadows. Today, the legacy of Himmler's plan can still be seen in the far-right movements that have gained prominence in Europe and the Americas. The wealth that was hidden during the war has been used to fund political movements, propaganda campaigns, and even acts of violence, all aimed at preserving the Nazi dream of a new world order. While the Fourth Reich may never have been officially established, its spirit lives on in the hearts and minds of those who continue to believe in the ideals of the Third Reich. And as long as these ideas persist, the specter of the Fourth Reich will continue to haunt the world.